And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Let's call this, I believe it's part 18 of the Integralist Chronicles. Okay, guys. Um, so listen, I've been watching very closely a lot of Donald Trump post-inauguration in the lead up to um, President Trump taking power in the White House on January 20th. I've been kind of reserving my opinions about him, mainly because I uh, I want to see what he does. I've been telling friends of mine privately, listen, I'm going to give him 90 days, 90 days to see what he does because I don't expect much. I think the system is inherently corrupted, so deep at this point, and ultimately, of course, philosophically and practically speaking, democracy is absolutely corrupt at this point. And it's a worldwide institution that has failed, really for the most part, since from, sort of the Enlightenment origins. But, since World War II, the West has been an absolute mess in so many ways. And I've highlighted that in the past. But I was going to give Mr. Trump 90 days in office before I really said anything. So these are my first public comments because there's some things that Mr. Trump is doing right now that I think are quite impressive. Now, some of these things are common sense things that, um, a lot of these Looney Tune issues like the woke stuff and, all the taxation stuff, things that never should have got out of control in the first place, but they were. So he's bringing back some basic common sense with the DEI stuff and all that stuff, which is good. But let's remember, he's just reversing effectively the batshit craziness of a system that has gone completely corrupt. And so, while I'm happy about it, at the same time, I realize that this is common sense stuff and what's happening behind the scenes. Because that's the thing with DC. You always have to pay attention to what's going on behind the scenes and not what oftentimes they're giving us optically in public, because that's usually a show to keep us distracted. Now, for me, this is kind of different. As I told you guys before on this series here, I dropped out of politics after the reelection of Barack Obama. What was that, about 2013, right around there? I believe is what it was, 2012, 2013, because I saw the system had been absolutely corrupted after his reelection. Now, I started to see it before that, don't get me wrong, but his reelection was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, kind of a moment for me. And it's where I started to dive deeper and deeper into history and back into my Catholic faith. And as I did that, in many ways, I pulled away from politics. And for about a decade, I didn't follow politics at all. I mean, sure, I see the news flash come through here and there about what's going on, but for me, Washington is always the same thing. It's always the same scandal. It's always the same issues. It's always the same played out arguments. And really, in those 10 years that I checked out of politics, I really didn't miss much, right? Just some of the names changed as people, sort of came and went from DC. But what's interesting this time around is I'm watching Trump because in many ways things matter more than ever. This whole thing with inflation, particularly, has shaken up things in my home as it's um, ill affected us in so many ways. And the frustration personally dealing with that, for me and my family, has really hit home. No way to avoid it now anymore. And I've been following politics a little bit closer. Um, but when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I got to be honest, guys, I did not follow it. I just wasn't there with it. Um, in fact, I didn't see, and I admit my mistakes when I make mistakes. I was not a Donald Trump guy during the primary that year. Um, and I didn't see who Donald Trump was. Now, who is Donald Trump, of course, right? Is he the sort of the pragmatic populist guy that's going to make America great again? Or as some of our Catholic friends on the sort of deep, what do you want to call it, end of world kind of scenario, situation, is he a Judaic Kabbalist who's going to usher in the Antichrist, right? I mean, this is how far-ranging these opinions run, and I've listened to all of them, and it's quite amazing because I'm just, I'm shaking my head with a lot of it. Now, I don't question the idea that Donald Trump may be associated with some nefarious groups. I don't doubt that. But I guess what I'm getting tired of, and the problem that I have here is that governance is a necessity and it's real. And I am one that's on record pointing out the troubles or how should I say this, the ruin of civilization that liberalism through Freemasonry has brought on to the world. It's one of the things why in my Mussolini series I keep saying one of the most impressive things he did was actually take on the Freemasons. And so I'm very aware of these problems. I'm very aware of sort of the conspiracies that lay behind the scenes in a new world order. Don't get me wrong. At the same time, we still have a world and a nation and communities to govern. And how do we do that if we get caught up in simply end times prophecies as Catholics? I have a problem with that because a lot of, let's be honest here, a lot of these guys that preach doom and gloom, that politics doesn't matter. And again, I'm a guy that despises modern liberalism and democracy, but I still believe we have a duty um, to govern this society, this world we live in, as best we can until our Lord comes back at some point. But a lot of these guys are older, childless men without any families that are pushing these issues, preaching, here comes the end of the world, let's all run to the top of a hill and, in a cult-like manner, let's all just, incubate ourselves as the chastisements come down from heaven. Well, that doesn't do anything for those of us that are actually trying to raise families. That's the problem with that. We still need some elements of hope. You want to preach to me about the end of the world and all this stuff that's happened. I get it. I see it through the movement of history. I've seen it through the Enlightenment, all the way through the revolutionary periods of the 1800s, through the World Wars, one and two, through the Cold War, and this massive confrontation with communism that has kind of consumed the entire globe throughout history. I get it. I get it. And there's some sort of satanic underlinings there. I get it. I see it all too. But does that mean we stop living our lives? That's my question I have with all of this. Then what do we do if we have families, if we have children? Do we not offer them a future at all? Because even if we believe in these end of time scenarios, like a lot of these guys are preaching, because it's a big industry now in the Catholic world, how do we take care of our families? And do we have responsibility for that? I don't know. I don't know if hiding in a bomb shelter with our families over the next, 5, 10, 30 years, however long before, the meteorites start falling from the sky. I'm not sure that's a very plausible scenario for most people. Listen, I'm the first guy to tell you that God's judgment is going to come down on this world. And God's judgment is probably going to come down on this nation because America is a very liberal nation, and it's not just a sinful nation per se, but it's a nation that actually exports all the great moral vices of the world, right? It's a leader in sort of these vices that we push, all these great mortal sins in the world. And so I acknowledge the problems that we have. But for those of us that are here, how do we live our lives, right? How do we govern this thing? Because these everyday things that Donald Trump is dealing with, they're real issues for a lot of us. A lot of us are just trying to, listen, call it a usury system is what you want to call it. Fine. I get it. It's a usury system. But this is the world we were born in. A lot of us do got to pay the mortgage. A lot of us do got to find a way to put food on the table. A lot of us are trying to deal with our medical bills. A lot of us are trying simply to survive in a world which the forces that be, those same forces we all fearful, have made it much more difficult on us. And it's like I say, every morning the average person wakes up and they're not thinking about the comets coming from the air or some planets flying past the Earth's atmosphere or whatever it is that you want to believe, right? Whatever it is that prophecy tells us at the end of the day. When most people wake up is, okay, how can I afford to take care of my family? How can I protect my family from not only just the great evils of the world, right? The evils of liberalism, the evils of our time, but also financially. How do we protect our people? Because again, listen, when we talk about the corruption of the culture, for example, a lot of people, even a lot of Catholics on the trad right, like to say, well, cultural Marxism, right, has destroyed the culture. You look at a lot of nations that are struggling to have children, right? Those nations that are having low fertility rates. I remember specifically having a conversation with some rad trads about the low fertility rates in Italy, and they're thinking like, oh, women in the workforce, women over workforce, that's what's collapsed fertility rates. Okay, fine. Listen, I get the social ramifications of liberalism. I've argued those points on this podcast myself for decades now, right? And how the attacking the institution of the family and sort of this radical feminism that has emasculated men and really filled women with the pride of Eve. Yes, it's been absolutely destructive on the family and society and culture and nations. But let's remember, it's not just an attack on a social scale. It's not just an attack on a religious scale or spiritual scale. It's a three-prong or four-prong attack. It's an attack at every level. And economics is one of those things that the devil has used. Economics does matter at the end of the day. And as we see specifically in America, right? And Trump is dealing with this. When you have an economic base and a manufacturing industry that's all been shipped overseas because we subsidize those things or exported those things overseas for slave labor to manufacture our goods, what's that done here at home? It's killed manufacturing. It's killed those basic level jobs that people need in order to raise families. I mean, look how the American family has been attacked financially, right? The steel mills are gone, the manufacturing jobs are gone, and we've become nothing but a service sector job. Well, guess what? Those steel mill jobs, those port jobs, those manufacturing jobs is what used to be sort of the foundation of the American economy, but not just the American economy as a whole, but the American family because a young man could graduate high school at 18, 19 years old, go get a job, maybe learn a trade for 9 months, whatever it is, and then go into the workforce and already be earning enough money to be able to raise a family. And young couples could get together that have no interest in partaking in this higher education thing that destroys everything in its path liberally, and young families could start to be formed, right? Well, we don't have that anymore because as we push off the sort of the idea of marriage and the childbearing years where couples can get together young and early in order for them to build families, we've pushed that off by pushing everybody into college for 4, 6, 8 years. I don't even think it's 4 years anymore. It's a minimum like 6 now to graduate from college. Well, what does that do? Just in its simplest terms, it pushes sort of the ability to have children, to foster families back into our late 20s, early 30s at the very least. What happens to women who are on a time scale, a biological time scale to have children if they wait to their 30s to start having kids? Well, they're not going to have very many kids. I mean, this despite all the other social dysfunctions that feminism has brought up, and that is again the Eve, the pride of Eve. That's totally socially destroyed women in the mindset and men in many ways too. Don't get me wrong. But economics has been at the forefront of the destruction of family just as much as it has been socially and through cultural Marxism and through pornography and through everything else. That's why these economic issues, they matter in many ways. So families could start to be formed. When young men graduate from high school or what have you, when men are at their sexual peak, they could partake of, again, this economic thing that encourages young families and children at a very young age, so they're capable of taking care of these families. It's been an attack on all kinds of different fronts, and we don't acknowledge this as Catholics. This usury system, this idea of shipping jobs off overseas has been just a devastating sort of end result for the American family and why we have such low birth rates. In Italy, for example, they have a lot of the same problems because for a long time they were, an agricultural society over there. They've had liberalism infused, Marxism infused over there, and they've had a lot of the same issues. But all of the West is suffering right now through these low infertility rates. And so, I mean, listen, this is just one example, guys, of the things that I think Trump, I got to give him credit for, right? He's dealing with, again, the economic foundations that have all been distorted. We are people that have been overly taxed. I mean, we're taxed on every freaking transaction we make in this country. And I tell my friends on the right this all the time, you guys with your guns, right? I gotta get my guns. I gotta get my guns and run to the front line, defend the Constitution of the United States. Okay, fine, you got your guns. But what good have all those guns done you? How have you effectively used them to actually defend freedom at the end of the day? Y'all collecting guns, but regulations, tax rates, jobs, the culture, society, everything has gone to the far left. And your guns haven't done a damn thing to stop this massive trajectory to the left. Because at the end of the day, while I'm a believer in the Second Amendment, I'm a believer that people should have a right to have guns and be able to defend themselves and their family and all that stuff. The Second Amendment it's not going to protect us from the liberal society, the tenets of liberalism that are rotting out the culture and the political system at the end of the day. Again, it's a shortcoming of conservatives and not thinking through things, right? The conservatives lost when they gave up on the culture war. The conservatives lost when they gave up on defending, Christian morality. So, I'm just trying to keep this in proper context. And when I see Donald Trump, and listen, I know a lot of people don't like tariffs, but I believe in the protectionist economy. I don't believe in free markets. I believe in markets, but not free markets. Not where we're taking slave labor, excuse me, from China, importing all these cheap goods here, so we can all, be instantly satisfied for the cheapest prices. Now, listen, I'm in favor of cheap prices. Don't get me wrong, but I don't in favor, I'm not in favor of our entire economic manufacturing base being shipped overseas at the same time. This is one of the reasons why we have so much poverty in America. It's interesting because for the conservatives, they like to highlight, again, these economic, advances that we have as Americans. We are the greatest economy in the history of the world, right? We fight for freedom and liberty, spread, economic prosperity all over the world, right? We got this, the economic engine of prosperity that's the leader of the world. And yet there's many Americans that are not partaking of the economic engine of prosperity and haven't been for a long time. And even average workers, average people have been falling further and further and further and further behind. So my point ultimately is this. We could sit here and preach about the end of the world and apocalyptic times and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that's not a concern, but our first primary concern as men, especially, is self-preservation and finding a way for not only for us to survive, but for our families to survive in the midst of this. If you want to put up a spiritual warfare in totality, well, I'm not sure that, you know, I'm not sure that's how this was ever intended for us to live our lives, even from God's perspective. You have to give people a sense of hope. You want to tell me that the world has gone absolutely, excuse my language, batshit crazy, and that now we are more corrupt today than the times of the flood of Noah? Fine, I'm okay with that because we've lost it morally. I get that. But you also have to give a message of hope. And how do we survive this thing? And how do we deal with this thing? And the first thing is self-preservation. The first thing is surviving. The first thing is what happens to my home? What happens to my family? How do I protect them? How do I shelter them? How do I feed them? That's a basic natural instinct that needs to be fed. And the end days apocalyptic doom and gloomers don't give a solution to that other than let's all head to a mountain and I will be your leader. And, and when the end of the world comes, we'll survive. Okay. Okay. First of all, you got to convince me it's going to go down that way. I think prophecy, while it's very fascinating, intriguing, I've read a lot of it, and a lot of it has come true to a certain respect. We don't know exactly how it's going to come true in the future or in what capacity it's going to take place. See, simply to preach the end of the world scenario without much hope doesn't do a lot of people any good. And that's why a lot of these guys are screaming online and have been online for a long time, and they're not really garnering any attention, a whole lot of attention, at least at the end of the day. And sure, you'll say, well, a lot of that is prophecy, or it's the rejection of Christ. It's a rejection of the faith. Sure, the apostasy. I get it. A lot of that is, but for a lot of those that would believe, that are seeing a lot of things that are being said, that believe in this stuff, everybody still needs hope. Everybody still needs a way to govern their lives at this moment in history. And when you wake up in the morning to have a chance. And so this is why I've given Donald Trump a chance, right? Again, is he a Kabbalist Jew that's trying to destroy the world? I can't judge that. I can't judge it. Um, all I can do is simply say, I'll give him a chance and let God work these things out. Because at the end of the day, our faith is based on God. Our faith is based on His will. Even everything we believe about the church is based on, um, His will. And at some point, it is going to be our Lord that has to clean this mess up because we are too fallen to fix these things. That doesn't mean we shouldn't care about the things of the world and how we're to govern. Listen, after Mussolini fell in Italy, which I have argued, right, in my Mussolini series, that he was the last temporal defender of the church. Pope Pius XII, who was a good pope, had a choice to make, right? He didn't say, well, listen, okay, the Russians have come into Italy, the Bolsheviks come into Italy, the Americans, the other wing of liberalism have come into Italy, fascism pushed out. Okay, let's all give up. Let's all just pray to the Lord and let's all give up. No, he did it. Pope Pius XII had to make some decisions. Now his choices weren't very good, right? He sided with the Christian Democratic Party in Italy after the war as a way to try and govern society. And popes have always told us we have to try and find a way to govern this thing as best we can until God reacts, until God responds, that we have a responsibility. And in that sense, Pope Pius XII chose the Christian Democratic Party. It turned out to be a disaster. Again, there really wasn't much of a choice between the Christian Democrats and the communists because that's what Italy was left with after fascism fell. But my point is, Pope Pius XII just throw his hands up in the air and say, okay, it's over, forget about it. Don't get involved in politics. Don't get involved in this post, again, sort of democracy world, where everything has fallen and collapsed and everything is irrelevant. That wasn't his attitude. And it's never been the attitude of the church. Just give up and let's all run to the top of a hill and wait for the end of the world. Because at the end of the day, we don't know when the end of the world is coming. I know a lot of these doom and gloomers believe that the end of the world is right around the corner. But let me tell you something. I was reading about the prophecies of Medjugorje and Fatima, Garrett Bendal, a few other ones. As far back as the early 90s, I was reading about these things, thinking to myself, oh man, this is it. It's over. It's over. I mean, this was, we're going 35 years now, going 40. And listen, I don't hold it, how should I say this, out of the realm of possibility that these things could happen just within the next few years. That's God's will. I don't doubt or question God's will. But at the same time, we don't know how long God is going to take to react to these things. We don't know if it's going to happen a year or two or 10 years or 50 years. We have no idea, right? Only God will know the time and day, as the Bible says. So that's why I say, as frustrating as American politics is, and I'll be the first to tell you, I think Donald Trump actually gets done very little at the end of the day, but the little that he does do may affect everyday families in a positive way and at least help us cope while we're all struggling. A lot of us don't have our own channels asking for 1995 to tell you about when the end of the world is coming. That's the irony of it all. All these same people that are telling you, here comes the end of the world. Don't worry about politics and economics and all the things of the world. They're still asking for 1995 a month to give you the updates on when the end of the world is coming. Do you see the hypocrisy there? You see the hypocrisy there? Money doesn't matter for all of us, but it does matter for the doom and gloomers that are going to tell us when the apostasy or when the end of the world is coming, right? But if we care about current economic events that affect our immediate families, somehow we're being shallow, somehow we are blind, somehow we're fake Catholics. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And Catholic, what do you want to call it? Catholic online influence. It can be just as nutty as any other liberal movement, to be honest with you. You know? So so listen, I'm gonna be on here probably very shortly again criticizing Donald Trump and some of the stupid things he's gonna do. I'll be the first to tell you, right? And he's already done a couple things I haven't liked. I won't mention it now. But my point is it's okay for people to hope for something better from this country at the end of the day, because it is our home. And maybe some of y'all have the ability to flee and go somewhere else where you think there's a utopia to be had. I don't know. It's like I said before, for all my critiques of America, American society and culture, it is my home. It is the land of my birth. It is the land I've raised a family in, and it's the land I'm going to die and be buried in. And I have a stake in it. I do. That's just what it is. And so, I guess now for me, I'm paying attention much more to what is going on in DC. Now, a lot of it is in frustration because at the end of the day, I know my vote really doesn't count. In my opinion, really doesn't matter. The only thing we can hope for right now is that, um, somebody has been put there that has at least some common sense, even if he doesn't see the whole picture at the end of the day, because these things do matter. And then at the end of the day, if nothing happens and our lives are made even worse within the next 4 years, would I be surprised? No, not at all. But I can hope for the best because we all need hope in this life. Just to run around with doom and gloom, here comes the end of the world, the sky is falling, doesn't do anybody any good. Remember, let's pray. All of this is dependent upon our Lord. Get to Mass, get to the Eucharist, pray your rosary, say your novenas, because at the end, no politician is going to save us. But politicians at times have been used by God to push his agendas. They have. And the church has always told us that throughout history, right? We live in the midst of a diabolical liberal world, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have hope. Because at the end of the day, it's God that is in control. I'll be paying attention more to Donald Trump's administration, see what he does. I'll give you the good with the bad, right? There you have it, part 18 of the Integralist Chronicles. This is Frank. I want to thank you for joining me. Signing off. Good night, everybody.